for those who are serious about it and who have learned the craft and who have done their research, I think there will always be room at the table for you. It is now all up to you. You are the master of your own fate. Today we're in my office and I'm going to talk to you about the one thing I probably know most about, and that is my profession. I'm a fantasy author. I've been publishing books in some shape or form for the last 10 years, and so this video is probably going to be most relevant for you if you are currently deciding whether or not you want to self-publish or follow the traditional publishing route. And I think I'm quite a good person to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both, because I am a hybrid author, so I have done both. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about my journey, how I got to where I am today, which is a self-published fantasy author. And then I'm going to talk to you about why I wouldn't want to be traditionally published anymore as it stands today. And I think this is also going to be relevant for not just writers, but also people who want to follow their own path and who are kind of tired of gatekeeping and who, just want to forge their own path. So how did I get into book publishing? I'm originally from Germany and I used to work as a TV producer, but the dream for a long time had been to one day hopefully write books and hopefully write novels. But I talked about in the previous video in this challenge that I always felt like I don't have enough experience, life experience. I had a very sheltered upbringing in Germany and I just basically didn't have stories to tell. So there was this yearning to go and travel the world, and that is what I ended up doing. And eventually I was on vacation in South Africa and had this crazy idea that I could become a safari guide and do the safari guide training in Southern Africa for 1 year. The problem was that I didn't have any money to pay for that training, and that's how the idea was born, that I thought I could write a book about my experiences. And so that is how I got my first traditional book deal in Germany. I didn't go with an agent at the time. This is also something, I do have an agent in Germany today, but in Germany, I would say it's still pretty common not to go with an agent, but to contact the publishing house directly. So that is what I did. I was lucky that I had a friend who had published a book with that publisher, and he was kind enough to give me his editor's email address. So that's how that came about. Long story short, I pitched them my book. I wrote a very rudimentary first chapter, and obviously I hadn't done the training yet. So the publisher kind of took a bit of a risk there because I hadn't done anything yet. But regardless, they believed enough in the idea, and I'll be forever grateful to that publisher that they took a gamble with me and they ended up giving me a book contract. And so I was able to use that small advance that I got from that book publisher to partly pay for the training. And then I also worked for another year so I could eventually pay for the safari guide training, and I did the training and I wrote my book about it when I got back. And so the experience I had with traditional publishers is that they weren't taking a big risk with me. I wasn't any of their obviously best-selling author. I was a blank page and I didn't know how my book was going to go. So there was very minimal investment on their part in terms of money in advance for sure, but also in terms of marketing, because obviously the marketing budget that these big publishing houses have will go towards the authors that they invested the most money in, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It makes a lot of financial sense that you would want to get your investment back. And with small debut authors like myself, these big publishing houses, it's a lot like Silicon Valley, where people will invest in all kinds of small startups. And it's basically like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And so when my book came out after I had completed the training, it was a travel memoir about my training. It did all right. It did all right. And I sold a couple of books and I was quite happy, but then it sort of dwindled and it sort of didn't go anywhere. I think the publisher was still fairly happy with the sales, but it didn't end up on any best-selling lists in Germany or anything like that. Until it did. And this is what is kind of unique about my story. So you will find a lot of debut authors these days anyway, that basically must make the best-selling list happen before the book even comes out. So you will find a lot of authors on social media shouting from the rooftops about their books before they even come out, because the pre-sales that are being made with the pre-orders count towards the first week of release. And so in order to end up on a best-selling list like the New York Times best-selling list, these lists always count 1 week. And so your best chance to end up on the list is basically the first week upon release, because all the pre-orders count towards that first week when your book is released. So anyway, my book didn't make that list, and not in the first week anyway. And so the book was on sale for 2 or 3 months, and then something miraculous happened, because then all of a sudden my book ended up on the German equivalent of the New York Times best-selling list. And that was only because of word of mouth, which was kind of incredible. So the book, people must just have told other people about it until eventually I had enough sales to make it towards the list. And then I got a bit of momentum. Then it really felt like things were going, and suddenly I got invited to like TV talk shows, and there was a lot more interest. So that book gained traction. Fast forward, I got another 2 book deals out of that, and I published follow-ups. I also ended up publishing children's books about African wildlife, and I'm still doing that till this day. So it kind of, it got a bit of momentum, and it sort of spiraled upwards from there. So my first book came out in 2016, and in 2020 I moved to Australia after having met my husband during the training in South Africa. So we moved to Australia just before the COVID pandemic happened. And it was during that time that I shifted my interest towards the actual dream, which had always been to eventually write novels. Remember, I wanted to make experiences, life experiences, so that I would have stories to tell. And by the time the pandemic came to be, I was at that point where I was yearning to write novels. And I do think the pandemic did that for quite a lot of people, where it sort of forced us to really sit with what's cooking inside of us. So when there was no more outside distraction and we all just sort of had to sit at home, I heard from a lot of people that pandemic, that time was where a big shift happened for them, and they sort of moved more towards the things they actually wanted to do with their lives. And so I came to realize that while I had become pretty good at writing nonfiction and children's books, I had no idea how to write novels. I had no idea how to write fiction. So during the pandemic, I took some of my savings and I did a writing course. And I wrote my first novel. It was a young adult fantasy. And I went up on submission with that book, which means that I started looking for a literary agent in the English-speaking world, because I had started writing books in English at that point. I was living in Australia, I was thinking in English, I was dreaming in English, so it only made sense to me that I would write in English. And that first novel got rejected by more literary agents than I care to admit. No, I don't have a problem admitting to it. I probably sent out 70 or 80 submissions, and I didn't get any response, and eventually I shelved that novel. To this day, that story holds a very, very special place in my heart, but as I would learn later on, the first novel that an author writes rarely sees the light of day. So it's kind of your practice novel. It's the novel that you have to write in order to learn the craft. And so that's what that novel was for me. And so I wrote another novel. And that novel, again, I finished it and I got very, very excited. And I took that first draft right after I finished it and I went on submission again. And you can probably guess what happened. Nothing happened again. It was too early to go on submission. I'm a very impatient person and I probably should have waited. I definitely should have waited. And with that novel, eventually I also approached the German market because I already had kind of a good standing there. But again, it was a no from the German publishers as well, even though I already had a very good track record with nonfiction. And there's a lesson in that. And it was kind of a humbling lesson. I think it was very, very important to me. In fiction, what matters most really is that the story is good. And I think that's a good thing. I really think that's a good thing. And yeah, so I think that's a good thing. And at the same time, I wasn't ready to give up on that story because I really loved that story. And I just really think I failed to make other people see the potential that story had, because it was unfinished also. It was just unfinished and I should have taken more time. So that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I have, is that you should really wait before you tell other people about this thing. Once you've finished a novel, put it in a drawer and don't look at it for a couple of months, and then go back into it. And then you will be able to look at your story like a reader and not like the writer, not like the creator of this thing. And so eventually I did that, and I couldn't give up on that story. And I looked at it again and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. But I wanted to work on it, and so I started looking for an editor to work with. And that was one of those milestones that I think is very important on my journey, because that's how I found Kristen, my editor, who I'm working with today, and she's fantastic. I love her to bits, and I couldn't have gotten to where I am today without her. So thank you, Kristen. So I started to work with Kristen on the novel, and Kristen used to be a teacher. So she was able to teach me, to get me to the next level of storytelling. She was able to really point out the workings of my story. And she also understood my vision, and that was so important. There was someone who understood my vision and who helped me figure out how to tell my story, and who knew where I wanted to get to and what hurdles I was facing. So that was novel number 2. And it happened at the same time that I went back into the online modules of the writing course that I did during the pandemic. And there was one module that I never touched, and it was a module on self-publishing. It's not that I had a bias against self-publishing. It just wasn't of interest to me. I just thought, well, that's not relevant to me at the time. So I just never looked at it. But then I was on a vacation, and I was looking for something to listen to, and I wanted it to be something of value to to learn more about my craft or whatever. And so that was an audio module. So I put that on my phone and I listened to it on this trip that I was on. And that was another milestone because I got so incredibly excited about self-publishing. As soon as someone explained to me that I could do this all by myself without having to split my royalties with a publisher, with having control over what my book cover would look like, with having full control over the kind of marketing that I wanted to do, I was fascinated by this, and I really thought that I could do this. And so it kind of spiraled from there. I was working with Kristen on my second novel, and at the same time I was online all the time reading about this self-publishing thing, and it was like a fish taking to water. I just felt very at home with this, and it felt like the answer to a lot of questions that I had always had, or things that I had grappled with in traditional publishing. He was my answer. So I think self-publishing is not for everyone. Not everyone needs that kind of freedom, and I think especially when you're starting out, there's something to be said about having a publisher holding your hand and guiding you through that process. So I fully understand that, and I was certainly grateful that I had that experience. Having said that, I do think there is also a lot of instances where debut authors have no idea what they're getting themselves into, and that's why they make a lot of mistakes, or that's why they feel completely like a fish out of water, where they just feel like left alone and they're overwhelmed, because it's not like a traditional publisher will sit you down and explain to you in detail what's going to happen. You sort of just, at least that was my experience, and also hearing from other authors online, that seems to be the case, that everybody feels like I actually have no idea what I'm in for here, and you're just along for the ride and you learn as you go. So anyway, that's my experience. Eventually, my second novel was finished and I decided not to go on submission again, also because that rejection shit show that I had experienced in the past kind of scarred me, and I just wasn't keen on doing that again. And so I decided to self-publish. I hired a cover designer and I worked with her on my cover, and I still use her today. Her name is Alicia, and so Alicia and I worked on my cover, and eventually my first self-published book came out, and I got it here. It's called The Anywhere Hotel. So it's a magical realism story about a magical hotel that can take you anywhere in the world, and that magical hotel attracts 6 misfits who want to run from their lives but eventually need to face the fact that they can't run away forever. And the funny thing was, once I had released that book, it started to do really well. It's not doing crazy well in that it ends up on bestselling lists or whatever, but the book is now, I released this in 2023, it's now 2025, and the book is just selling itself. And I do think to a large extent, that was due to the cover. There's something about the cover that just works very well, and the story is also good, but I think it's one of those things where the cover really matches the story. And so yeah, this has been doing pretty well, and ever since I have written 2 more novels that are kind of in the same magical realism genre. And the problem that I realized I had, and this is one problem that you might want to consider if you want to self-publish, is that all of those books, I got them here, they're standalones. So they kind of look the same if you look. So this is the second one, The Ever After Diary, and then we got the third one, which is called The Age of Elephant. So they kind of look similar in a way, but they are all standalones. And as an indie author, the indie author structure works best with a series, because there's all kinds of marketing tricks and things that you can do that build on a series. For example, a lot of authors will give away the first in the series for free. And because a series has the same characters going forward, the readers read the first book for free. Maybe you put a cliffhanger in the end, or the readers just fall in love with those characters, and then they want to know what happens next. And so they will pay for the next books in the series. And that is a model that just works like a charm for self-published authors. So I didn't have that with these books, and that's why I think while they are doing well, I don't think it is ideal for self-published authors to go with standalones. It's not something I would recommend. So eventually I decided that my next story was going to be a series. And that is what I have been working on for the last 2 years. It's coming up 2 years. 2 years now. My next book series is going to be a witchy fantasy trilogy, and that is the first story, the first book series that I'm going to publish that is perfectly optimized for self-publishing. So I started the journey with, I started the story with this story here. It's a novella, and you can get the ebook for free. So that's my so-called lead magnet for my readers. So I'm giving this away for free as an ebook. People can order the print copy afterwards if they want to, but this is completely free. And so later this year, I will then release the first book in the trilogy. And so the idea is that people read the novella, they like it, and then they're gonna pay for the upcoming books in the series. And the uptake for the novella, for the free ebook, has been fantastic. I'm running meta ads on this book, and so I get a lot of you can get this book for free if you sign up for my readers group, which is a monthly letter that I send out. And so that readers group has been growing, and I get really nice feedback for the story, which gives me a lot of hope and makes me excited for the upcoming trilogy. So that is my journey up until this point. And so where am I now? I am now at the point where I have fallen in love with the idea of self-publishing, and I kid you not when I say I really do not desire to be traditionally published anymore. And I want to give you my reasons for saying that. And bear in mind that these reasons come from a place of having done well in traditional publishing in the past. So I have done the Bestselling List. I have felt the thrill of walking into bookstores and seeing my book on the shelves. I have done book signings and book readings, and I sat on talk shows and all of that. And I want to say that that is also partly why I don't want to be traditionally published anymore, because I actually didn't really enjoy like that circus that was around it. This makes it sound like I was like famous or whatever, but there was a tiny bit of momentum and there was a tiny bit of fame in Germany at the time when I was invited to all those talk shows and whatever. And I did not enjoy the fame part of it, and I didn't enjoy not being in control and having to do interviews with journalists and sort of, that whole part actually wasn't for me. So that was one reason, that's one reason why I must actually say I'd rather do self-publishing, do my own marketing and be in full control. Because when you're with a traditional publisher, there's not really the opportunity to say no to things. Like, why would you say no if a talk show asks you to cut, like from, as a newbie author, from a newbie writer, from your point of view, is probably like, why would you not want this? But like, if you don't want that, it's very hard to say no to things when you're traditionally published. So I'd rather do my own marketing. And I will also say, in today's publishing environment and industry, it is expected of authors to do their own marketing, to be on social media, even better if you already have a platform. I said earlier, I did make a mental note there. I said earlier that I couldn't get a publishing deal for my first book because it wasn't good enough. The story wasn't good enough. And now I'm thinking that might not be entirely true, because I do think it is totally possible to get a book published, a story published that is actually not the highest quality, but because you have a large following on social media, you get a book deal. I do think that is happening. And so the truth is that unless you are one of the top tier authors that the publishers have invested a lot of money in, you are expected to do your own marketing, and the publishing houses, they just don't have the capacity to do a lot of marketing for you. So you have to do your marketing anyway, and so I would much rather do all of that and then keep the majority of my royalties. So in traditional publishing, you, depending on your deal, you give away like probably 80% or more of your royalties, whereas in indie publishing, you get to keep that much. You get to keep like 60 or 70% of your royalties. So you will sell a lot less books potentially, but you also don't need to sell as many. So for me, it ended up being a business decision. I also felt like after having been traditionally published for a while, I felt it was quite hard. I only get paid, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in Germany you get paid your royalties once a year. And throughout the year, there's like no way of knowing how many books you really sold, because while you can see how many books are being given to bookstores across the country, the bookstores reserve the right to give those books back if they couldn't sell them. So you can't really see what your numbers are until you get that paycheck once a year. And I think from a business point of view, this is impossible to like make a living from that and not have anxiety all the time, because you don't know how much you're going to make. So a lot of authors will actually, traditionally published authors, many of them actually don't expect to ever make their advance back. So how it works in traditional publishing is that you get an advance on future book sales. So let's say for your first book, you get $10,000, and so you need to sell $10,000 worth of books before you make any money on top of those 10,000. And so a lot of authors will never make more than, from their book sales, more than the advance that they got. And so the only way to make this sustainable is to sell more books so that you get another advance and another advance and another advance. And so it's very important that your publisher believes in you, and your agent as well believes in you, thinking they can build a long-term author career with you. So it's a huge investment. So from a business point of view, that didn't make sense to me anymore, because once I learned about self-publishing and I had these books and they started making money monthly, that allowed me to plan a lot more. And so basically, if by the end of the financial year I feel like I haven't made enough money yet, I can actively do marketing, my own marketing, to sell more books. And in terms of marketing, there's also a lot more levers that I can pull, because I get to keep the majority of my royalties and because I don't need to ask anyone for permission. For example, it would be very hard to run Meta ads, Instagram, Facebook ads for a traditionally published author and make that viable, just because you don't get to keep a lot of your royalties, or you can't easily play around with the pricing of your book. So let's say you want to run a special where your book is only 99 cents. You can't do that with a traditional publisher. And so over the last 5 years now, I have learned so much about self-publishing, and I have become quite good at pulling those levers and making it work for myself. And I can already see it working so much better now that I have a series with the same characters. And I plan to write only series going forward. And so I can really see that it's basically just a numbers game. The more books I put out there, the more viable this is going to become. And to me, that is very exciting long term. And the other thing that I don't like about traditional publishing is also how long it takes. I think I said in the beginning that I'm a fairly impatient person. And so when I have written a book, I don't want to have to wait 2 or even 3 years until that book comes out. And with self-publishing, I can just stick to my own timeline. And on the other hand, I also know from traditionally published authors who become very stressed out because of the timeline of the publisher that they need to stick to. So again, I enjoy just being on my own timeline, having control, having freedom, and I can also just easily push a release date if I need to push it a month in the future. I can just do that, and you know, it won't be the end of the world. Here's what I like about self-publishing and why I said in the beginning, my journey is relevant to people not just in the writing industry and the publishing industry, because self-publishing gets rid of all the gatekeepers and the big publishing houses and the big players in an industry that get to control what gets published. It is now all up to you. You are the master of your own fate. And YouTube is kind of the same thing. You don't need Netflix permission, Netflix approval anymore. If you want to bring out a documentary, you can just do it yourself. And for those who are serious about it and who have learned the craft and who have done their research, I think there will always be room at the table for you. So that's the one thing I want to say, is that I think it is totally fair if you feel like you want that stamp of approval from a big publishing house in a market that is so incredibly crowded. I totally understand that, and I think that's valid. And you know, I think for me, I have come to this place where I am right now because I had that experience of being traditionally published. I had that, and I'm quite glad that I had it, and I think that is why I got to where I am today. But I fully understand if you feel like in order to stand out in a crowded market, you would like to go with a traditional publisher. Be prepared for a long slog of rejection and to really spend a lot of time in the query trenches where you fight to get an agent. But once you've overcome that hurdle, it might be the best decision you've ever made. I'm just glad where I am today, and I think it's I could gush about just self-publishing all day long. I think it's fantastic, and I think it is a very viable way to make a career from your writing, even today, or maybe especially today. And so I think that's where I'm gonna leave you for now. Let me know in the comments if this was interesting to you. I don't normally post a lot of content about self-publishing or the business of being a writer, because my mantra has kind of been, I don't wanna just make videos about how to make it happen, and that's how I make it happen. Do you know what I mean? But if you're interested, and if my story and my journey resonated with you, do let me know in the comments if you want more videos about marketing, book marketing, or whatever. I'd be very happy to help, and I see you back here tomorrow for the next video.
I think we're overall just very tired of being sold to. Books are a means for readers to relax, to escape, and to calm down. okay? And YouTube does the same thing.